I believe that when people are talking about design and design thinking these days, they are, whether they're using that language, whether they're saying, design thinking is the new X, or whether they're using language like Design 2.0 or services, systems, and strategies, what people are talking about is the application of design techniques, design methods, and design sort of frames of mind, not to the production of new artifacts and objects, but to the application of developing new models of business value, potentially new business models themselves, and ultimately to organizations, right? So it's the kind of a move in the language that Tim Brown uses in his essay, from the design of things to the design of ideas. I think what's different about this new Design 2.0 or design thinking, or what we call epic thinking, is that it is trying to make this shift toward engaging in a much broader conversation. In the exercise that we did during the session when we talked about vision, vehicle, impact, the new design is trying to figure out how to engage in a larger story. What is the larger goal? And it's using design techniques to do that, and it's also thinking very carefully and strategically then about how to realize or achieve that. So it is much more strategic, and it is much more, from my perspective, entrepreneurial and proactive than the traditional models of industrial design, say, where I might have been hired by a car company in the 1950s to come up with a new fin type for the Chrysler every year. So it's a shift. It is in part a shift, does represent a shift in mindset for the design discipline or design practices in general.
As a discipline, design is about putting things together. It's about understanding, first of all, how do people behave, and most important, how do people behave as they're inserted into their context and their systems. And so if I'm an organization that is used to thinking about my problem in isolation, and I'm trying to design something new as a business model for a system that is more complex, a necessary starting point is to understand how do people behave in this different system and in this different space, right? And because business as a discipline traditionally is analytic and is about breaking problems down and solving sort of the technical aspects of these different pieces separately, it's not particularly well suited for coming up with, for example, this new idea of a new business model within this much more complex system, because the problem here is about aggregation and is about integration, not about just analysis through breaking down things into their pieces. And so that's one of the ways in which I think design thinking becomes an incredibly useful tool, because it is about, let me see what the situation is from all these perspectives, and especially from the perspective of the people I'm trying to solve for, and their realities as they happen in the context of this broader world. Whereas before, the boundaries between organizations were kind of much clearer. The boundaries between sectors were much clearer. Given the ways in which our lives have evolved, those boundaries have actually been eroded to dramatic extents, right? And so the boundaries between organizations, the boundaries between sectors, the boundaries between countries have been eroded in dramatic ways. And what this has created is a much more interconnected and interdependent system than what organizations are used to operating. If, as an organization, you were designed and you were created to operate within a particular sector and provide a particular service within that, and you built a business model around that, you were solving for that problem sort of within the boundaries of your organization, within the boundaries of your business model. But the world is changing, and now the disciplines, the structures that you created to solve problems within your organization no longer hold, because now you're solving for a much broader, much more complex set of issues. And what this basically has created for organizations is that it's no longer about finding technologies or finding products or even designing services. It really is about understanding that their business models are being disrupted by these broader changes. And so the question is now becoming, we need to reinvent or redesign our business model. And that is true whether you're operating in the for-profit sector, in the non-profit sector, or in government. Because the boundaries between all these sectors are now completely blurry. And you would be very hard-pressed to find, for example, a single government service or policy where the private sector and NGOs are not involved. You'd be very, very hard-pressed to find one. And you're hard-pressed to find a business service where the government is not somehow involved in one way or another. And so this kind of blurring of the interactions between organizations has created just a new space that organizations need to be solving for. And that means that the kinds of tools and disciplines that you need to solve them are very different.
All the decision-making disciplines are faced with the same, as they're trying to address this more interconnected, more complicated, more complex world, we're all faced with the same functional challenge in terms of how do we collaborate, right? And so for the design fields, as we begin to move more and more into whether it's design thinking or social design, the role, we move from a role in which we're comfortable in, as the artist, as the auteur, as the director, into a role where we have to figure out what is how do the artifacts that we make contribute to moving a collaboration and a conversation forward on the one hand, and on the other hand, how do we move actually into a role where we're co-creating or collaborating or more of a producer in that relationship. And I think that whether we're talking about business, government, design, or the social sector, each of the players in each of those groups are struggling with trying to figure out from their own sides what they can productively bring to the table and how to facilitate and co-produce or co-design the outcomes that we're all aiming for.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the challenge, I think, or designers are used to being the owners of whatever it is that's being created because of this ethos of sort of artistic purity and making sure that they're the defenders of the insights that came together to put this thing here, right? Yep. In this world that we're talking about, as you mentioned, it's about, yes, you have incredible insights to add, but these insights, in order for them to be relevant and effective, they need to also be combined with the insights that somebody who's looking at the business model side of things has to bring to the table. And whereas traditionally in the design profession, the way it works is kind of sequential, where I'm going to come up with my solution, I'm going to give it to you, and I don't want even to see how you are violating and touching my beautiful creation in order to make it real. I don't need to see that. Here, if we don't incorporate those two things in the process of co-creation, it just doesn't work, right? Because kind of the business model has to be embedded into the solution, and the solution has to be embedded into the business model. And that's where this co-creation and this collaboration becomes critical.
Whether you're outcome-oriented or process-oriented, bad Uncle Larry Keeley, right, the Doblin Group, tells us 90% of innovation fails, 90% of innovation programs. The numbers may even be higher these days. And the reason they fail, I would argue, is because they're happening in isolation, they're happening without buy-in, they're happening without deeper cascading understanding through an organization. And so you can have a great idea that you can deliver, but unless you can deliver the means by which the reason for that, the way to instantiate it, the way to implement or realize it into the culture of the organization, it's going to fail.